so we may go ahead and dive in. Kind of tease the idea that Katie has some news. Katie, you want to share with the group what you shared with me earlier today?
Yeah, sure. It's just that Chris, my husband, and I, we got a countersigned LOI, our very first, and our first offer that we had made on a business called Flooring Concepts, based in Southern Indiana, which is just 20 miles from where we live in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a huge win for us. That became more and more of a priority, the geography of the business. So we knew our options may be limited, tightening our geographic search to a tighter 50-mile radius. But we're really excited about this business. They are in flooring sales, distribution. They subcontract all their labor. Right now, they're 20% residential, 80% commercial, and a lot of room to grow. A very healthy business was started in 1997. One of the original founders is still the owner. So there's a lot of emotion, I think, in this deal, but the good kind. We already have, I think, a very strong relationship with the seller, and I think he has a lot of confidence in that we will take his legacy, carry that out, and scale it in this Southern Indiana market. So really excited.
Well,
Congrats.
very happy
Thank
for you.
you.
Congratulations. Yeah, very neat. And I think you said a thing or two that's kind of a magic word and a theme that I think we all need to be reminded of, that it is so important to do everything you can from the very first minute to build the relationship with that seller. And sometimes it gets kind of buffered by the broker. We get that, but there are tactful ways to try to work around that and begin building that rapport so that you can have a smooth and hopefully successful transition. And there are many reasons you should be focused on doing that, but one of the big ones is just what Katie described. Is there's often that real close emotional tie. It's kind of like they're letting their baby go off to school, or something. I don't know how else you might describe it, but it is a very emotional event for most of these sellers, and it's something that is very important to work around. And the more you can do to assure them their legacy is going to be protected, the better it's going to be. I was on a call earlier today with one of our AEs, and he too was reporting a very positive rapport with the seller, such that it made the whole QOE due diligence process, all the prep, all the final negotiations, all of that went pretty smooth. And this has been Anuwali that is I was talking to, and his journey from LOI to close has only been about 4.5 months. And I made a comment to him. I said, "Well, you're on the fast side of this track." And he said, "What, really?" And he was a little bit surprised that I made that statement. And I said, "Yeah, it's not uncommon for these deals to take quite a bit longer to come together." And he asked me why, and I said, "Well, because quite frankly, a lot of it has to do with just the initial process of making connection with the sellers and being able to facilitate all of the 1,000 questions you're going to want to ask and information you're going to want to pull." So it kind of goes again full circle to the idea of building that relationship. So anyway, that's a long response, Katie, but thank you for sharing that, and congratulations. Good news for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anybody else have news they would like to share or updates on their journey? Maybe stages you've gotten through? Quiet group today, I take it. Let me see as I look down through the list here.
Nothing to share on my end, but just talking to a seller, a new seller right now. It's going good so far. So just managing that relationship and getting documents, but that's the only news.
Good, good. Nate, have you gotten any feedback on your IOI that went out?
Hey, Doug, I actually pulled that IOI. I couldn't get comfortable with the copier industry with a negative CAGR, but I do like the company a lot. And still, I'm talking to the seller, so it hasn't completely shut down, but not ready to move forward.
Okay, well, understandable. Well, I'm sorry I missed everybody last week. I had to be out on a personal matter with some friends and family, but it's all good, and it was a great day. But uh, I know you were in good hands with Rich, and at the sake of being a little bit redundant, I wanted to have this session today also be some continuing Q&A, just general discussion. I will preview that next week Hayden is going to join us and sit in, and he's going to focus his theme around talking a little more about the creation of holdcos, holding companies for these enterprises and ventures. And as many of you may have heard or know, that's a passion of Hayden's, has been for a while. He's gone through several iterations of holdco creation and liquidation. So he's got a lot of good information coming next week, but we'll have more on that as we get into next week. But does anybody have a pressing thought or question they'd like to kind of lead off with and either ask me or give to the group to share?
Hey, Doug, I guess I got a question. This could be, and I apologize if this has been covered this may have been covered in the past before my time. One of the challenges I have run into on a couple of my inquiries are sellers, and especially in the trade, electrical HVAC, requiring buyers to have at a minimum a GC license or some sort of some license of sort. Have we ever, I guess in encountering that, I can't imagine that I'm alone in encountering this, and this has been on a few occasions. Have we had any success in kind of navigating around that if you don't have such a license? And it's not a requirement of the jurisdiction or anything. It seems like it's the seller's thing.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of angles to that question, Carl, and it's a great one to ask. Thank you for bringing it up. And it is an important one that comes, and quite frankly, I'll share something. Hayden and I have been working on some, I'll call it refinement of our own process on helping people get through the gauntlet. And one of the issues that we've put on our flow chart for tracking these things is to really hit the licensing issue much sooner in the process than we have traditionally done. And I said there's a couple of angles to this. One of the big ones that often influences our success with these deals is the jurisdictional rules and laws about licensing. The bottom line is it is not consistent either state by state or even sometimes county by county and ultimately even city by city. The further east you move, the more, I call it, prohibitive licensing gets about entry into markets. There are a lot of jurisdictions that want the principal owner to be the holder of the license. And obviously that suggests that you have to have been in the trade for a while to be able to earn that license and bring it in. There are other jurisdictions that are more flexible in terms of as long as a paid employee has the license, a company can operate. So all of that said, and there are many more iterations of that we can get into, the big question is just simply understanding first the statutory requirement of what might be in play in your geography for the licensing. Now, what I heard you describe, Carl, is perhaps a seller bias that nobody without a license is worthy of owning this business. And that's a whole different mindset. That's a whole different challenge. If the jurisdiction doesn't require it to be that way, but the seller seems to be indicating he thinks it should be that way, that's a judgment call on their part. And I'm inclined to say that when a seller has a bias like that comes to the table, you're going to be generally hard pressed to change their mind. I'm not going to deny that we have had situations in the past. We have had biases from sellers where a male dominated business owned by a male seller was unwilling to release it to a female buyer. We've seen that happen. And, in a modern enlightened world, you would hope that wasn't present, but it is. It's just an unfortunate reality of the way the world goes. But I think to sum it up, I think the big issue to look at is that you've got the jurisdictional requirements about licensing, and then you have seller bias about licensing, and you got to kind of try to wade through and separate. Have you had other iterations of that, Carl, that you've run into?
No, it's basically been two companies I looked at, and it really, I didn't, in all honesty, I didn't even give it much effort getting past the broker at that point.
Yeah.
It wasn't even a matter of really convincing the seller. It was, I couldn't even get past the broker.
Yeah.
I guess my follow-up question to that would be then, my research was essentially more or less limited to the state. I do know, like you mentioned, different counties down to cities might have their own overlays to their requirements. Are there any tools available to us that we can kind of research that or check that as far as what jurisdictions have what requirements?
Well, the big thing I'll tell you is, and we've done it ourselves on the coaching bench. We've just relied on Google and Chat GPT and any of the other AI, search engines to help research that and define it. And I have had people ask me, why doesn't Acquira have a glossary or a master directory of these things? And it is a body of work that, people could spend a full career putting together and then continually modifying because the laws continue to change. So no, we don't have a glossary. We relied on some pretty common research tools to ask the questions once we zero in on the location of the business.
Hey, Doug, just to follow up on this topic a little bit more, what industries is it fair for a seller to say, we can't do business with you unless you have expertise in it? So, for example, I can't get near, an architecture firm, just don't know it well enough. But where do you think the general lines are against, general knowledge?
It's an interesting question, Nate. I'm not sure I've thought about it in that context. Yeah, I think probably there's a spectrum that definitely requires it. And I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking really extreme examples, which we never get into. You've got medical practices, doctors and dentists and things like that might be put up for sale. Obviously, a similarly licensed professional is going to have to take that over to be able to maintain the practice. But that would be, if you envision a spectrum, from 0 to 100, that would be way extreme on the one end. And coming back down the scale, you get into these things. I guess what I would tell you, the biggest drivers do start with the jurisdictional requirements. If you get into a location where they allow you to operate as long as a paid employee holds the applicable license, there is still good, viable upside possibility with that business. But if it's an industry where you yourself feel vulnerable because you don't really know the technical side of it, you got to look hard at what the roster of people is, what the skills matrix may be that you can leverage. I mean, I'm thinking right now as we talk about this, I'm thinking of John Lamari in Chicago. He bought a commercial HVAC business, and it is HVAC, and there's a lot of transferable opportunity there. But nonetheless, this company has proven to be pretty high end, pretty niche solution sales. But he's doing quite well with it because he has a team that is all in. They bought in early to him as an owner and to some of his statement of vision and purpose and direction he wanted to take the company. And to some degree, in his back pocket, he had the benefit that the seller was a little bit of a jerk and people on the team had grown tired of him. So they were happy when the news came that he was leaving and new blood was coming in. So it has gelled very nicely, and John's doing as best as you can expect with the transition. And even already now, just a little over 6 months in, starting to think about growth opportunity and expansion ideas.
Thanks.
Okay, anybody else got something? Quiet group today. Don't be shy.
Well, this question is a bit self-serving as we transition or somersault rather from the LOI to the diligence phase. And, you know, per the example that you shared from your call earlier today, Doug, I'm already trying to mentally prepare for when there's some starts and stops in terms of momentum. And I'm just wondering, even before this, like dialogue with a broker or, you know, just engaging with the seller as you work through diligence, when you do run into those lags where my perception would be sometimes the seller is overwhelmed by diligence requests and kind of just wants to take a break from the whole process, what are some ideas that everyone has in terms of how do you jumpstart the momentum? How do you re-engage everyone when you are, you know, 6 weeks in the diligence and it still feels like you've got hundreds more requests to fulfill? How do you kind of reinvigorate the team on both sides to make sure that everybody's just as enthusiastic about getting to the finish line, whether that's an LOI or whether that's a full close?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question, and it relates to the notion, and we do talk about this some in our training. And for those of you that are in the A+ program, we do it with your advisor help. There's a notion of creating for yourself your own kind of project plan and look at the steps that are mapped out in the training and set your own expectations for what it's going to take. There are a couple of events that would, in classic project management speak, there are a couple of events that fall out on the so-called critical path of the journey. Your SBA banker is going to tell you what their window is going to take. I believe Alan at FIB typically talks in terms of 60 days from start to finish, and start fundamentally represents a full and complete package submitted to the bank. So obviously there's some prep time in front of that. But knowing that there's, using that example, knowing there's a 60 days sort of hard window of time, you lay that into your project plan and you say, well, okay, I know that's going to be there. So what do I want to do about fast tracking to get ready for that and get my information together? And then even before that, you do have like the quality of earnings exercise. And typically, I know Vipul and his team generally speak in terms of turning around a QOE in 30 days. But again, that's contingent on good data being readily available to start. And it's hard to hold that 30-day clock on QOE if the information is dripping in and a discovery of a particular issue comes up. You got to go back to the seller or the broker, try to get clarification, and then they stall it, days or weeks on the reply. And to your point, Katie, it's not uncommon for these sellers to kind of sort of exhibit a due diligence fatigue, because it is a 1,000 questions coming at them. And again, depending on the personality of the seller, they may take those questions as offensive in the worst case, and just bothersome in the best case. And so they're still trying to run the business and keep things going. So yes, there's a tendency to have a lag there. So it is important to try to lay out your own expectation of a project plan and a timeline you'd like to try to follow, and do what you can to tactfully poke and nudge to stay on the timeline that you've established, and see if you can get it done, knowing that expectation. But this too is one of those things that does unavoidably go back to the strength of the relationship you try to build with the seller, and knowing early on what their real motivation for selling may be could be a big indicator of how fast they're going to respond and be willing to work with you. I'm thinking of a couple of cases where, in hindsight, what we ended up learning was the seller personally maybe didn't really want to exit the business, but maybe a spouse was telling him he had to, or there were other outside factors trying to convince him it was time to sell the business. And then when all this process came together and the reality of the possibility of them no longer being the owner, they just threw up their hands and said, no, I'm not willing to go there. I'm going to hang on to this. And hindsight's always 20/20, and you say to yourself in those situations, gee, dude, I wish I had known that 90 days ago. You could have saved me a lot of time and money messing around with this. But fortunately, those are extreme cases, but they do exist. Did that make sense, Katie?
Yeah, it does. And so if I'm hearing you, it may be appropriate to collaborate with the seller to say, here's the timeline we're working against. We want to get you closed and set up in Bermuda as soon as possible. So can we agree that these are the milestones that, we'll get a first big batch of requests fulfilled by, the close of the first 2 weeks, and just kind of collaborate with them so it doesn't just feel like here's all the questions and then here's 30 more and 30 more.
Yeah, being very transparent in what that timeline needs to look like, I think is probably the best approach to be able to kind of come into an agreement on how the process is going to work. And the flip side of everything I'm saying, we have had sellers that they'd be happy if you could write the check tomorrow and then they'd be out of there. And the good news in those cases, a lot of times it's not because they're dodging something. It's because they know they've got a good business. They know they've got their ducks in a row. They know the records are going to stand up to whatever scrutiny they're given. And, they're ready to move. So, but the bottom line is, I like the way you framed it better, just, sit down and collaborate and have that discussion about the timeline. And there are some undeniable sort of hard stops that exist. It's going to take the attorneys a certain amount of time to draft the documents. It's going to take the bank their time with underwriting and review. Your own QOE process is going to take some time. So there's 3 or 4 of those kind of events that are pretty much critical path items. You can't avoid them. You can't really work around them. You can work in parallel with them to get some other things done. So, but laying all that out with some degree of clarity first for your own benefit, so that you can create some of your own mental security around how it needs to work. But then trying to show the seller what you're looking at and how you would like to execute. See if they've got any other thoughts or inputs that could tell you something. You could certainly understand there might be you lay out that timeline and seller comes back to you and says, oh, but I've got a huge project I've got to finish in the next 45 days. There's just no way I'm going to be able to give you anything or turn any attention to this. And you have to work around that. You have to figure out, my question to that reply would be, okay, maybe not you, but is there somebody else? Do you have a bookkeeper I can talk to? Or, do you have an accountant I can talk to? Do you have a ops manager or an office manager we could talk to? So,
Yep, that'll make sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else? Other thoughts or questions? Yeah, Nate.
Hey, everyone. So this is a question regarding license requirements. So, where the license is a moat, right? So GC in certain states, plumbing, HVAC, all those kinds of scenarios. I'm finding lenders, specifically SBA, right? So they prefer the seller to retain equity, maybe with an option to buy out later if there's no one on staff who has a license or can, easily procure one before close. I was wondering, what are other ways to maybe negotiate that or balance that kind of give and take when, realistically you kind of want to take over and let the seller go, right?
Well, we have had transactions where we have had sellers agree to take as small as a literal 1% interest just to have that hook and that connection. The irony in that requirement is that it's not about the magnitude of the equity stake that makes it work. It's the fact that there is an equity stake. So, and in fact, there's a cap if another partner hits the 20% or greater threshold of percentage of ownership, they are going to have to come into the SBA with a personal guarantee. So sellers obviously don't want to do that. And we have had deals, 1 or 2 that I can think of, where there was a reason they went up to like a 19% stake. That was not so much the seller, it was more some private equity money that was coming in. But on the seller side, it's usually very small percentage declaration, like a 1 or 2%, something really nominal.
Okay, got it. So, and then you add in some type of an option to buy them out.
Yeah.
And then, first 90-day plan is to identify a way to procure the license without said seller.
That's right. To backfill that license either way. If you're in a jurisdiction where you essentially can go to the market and hire that license, that's a great option. And if the next step behind that is whether or not you've got somebody on the team that is right on the cusp and is ready to sit for the license exam, they just haven't done it yet. You can do some things to encourage them to step up and be the one to go get the license. That sometimes takes a little bit longer because maybe there's, I don't know, another 20 or 40 hours of training they've got to have to be able to qualify for whatever the statute requires. So there's those kind of factors that kick into it, but kind of in order of magnitude,
Yeah.
you retain the seller with a small percentage, you incentivize somebody on the team to, I'm sorry, number two is you hire the license if you can in your jurisdiction, and number three is you incentivize somebody that's already there to go sit for the license.
Okay. And then I guess to maybe cost that out, right? Looking at how to find the license in the market, what are good ways or resources to kind of go out and search for that info so you can kind of at least have that general cost in mind.
We've actually got a kind of an affiliate partnership with a group called Service Leader Services. It's a mouthful. Cliff Savage is the founder of that. He's actually partnered with me on a couple of our ACE engagements.
Okay.
And where we've got highly technical or even up to licensing challenges, his firm has helped some of our AEs properly address that. That's kind of what Cliff and his company does. They are a go-to-market resource for finding the talent you really need, depending on the specific technical requirements that are there.
Okay. And that was the Service Leader Services, Cliff Savage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doug.
Yeah. Cliff's a great guy. He's been in the trades for a long time. He's done a good job of building a network across the country, and he's helped several of our AAs identify really critical talent in their companies to move in. I think we've actually identified and placed one GM for one of the businesses through Cliff.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Doug. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, hands up or anything? Well, with that, I think I will give you guys back a little bit more time in today's calendar. I really appreciate you sitting in and joining us. I hope this was helpful. And like I said, next week, Hayden will be our guest host or speaker. He will be talking about creation and formation of holdcos for your long-term wealth building ideas. And we'll get some emails out about that as we get closer to next week. But with that, I'm going to sign off. Go out there. I hope you have a great weekend. Talk later. Bye, everybody.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.